Welcome back to the channel, everybody. How you doing? I just want to say I appreciate you guys being here. Today we are going to talk about arguably one of my favorite authors of all time. Well, currently, Emily Henry. I read 6 of her books, her most popular books. I've read all 6 of those, and I decided, let's talk about them. I'm going to do a ranking at the end of my favorite versus my least favorite. I kind of just want to talk about each book individually and just talk about like the pros and cons of just the things I've seen in Emily Henry's books that are kind of the same, and things I like versus things I just don't like. And that doesn't mean every single book has this. It's just some books that do have them and they're kind of like my least favorite. So we're going to get into this, and we're going to talk about my first book that I started reading from her, and then we're going to get to the last book I read from her, and then we're just going to go from there. First book I read was Beach Reads by Emily Henry. I read this book a couple years ago, and you follow the character named January and August. The two of them are enemies to lovers, you could say. This is tough to say because Emily Henry does play with the enemy to lovers trope in her books, but she doesn't do it in every single one of them, which is fine. But the problem is, I feel like enemies to lovers is not really there, because in this book, January hates August, but August doesn't hate January. So it's not true enemies to lovers. It's more of like, I've said this plenty of times, where it's just like the recess playground kind of thing, where like the boys being to the girl or the girls being to the guy, but the other person still like likes them. That's why they're doing it. And this is a big rivalry, and January has to go out to a beach house in my lovely state of Michigan. They are making a challenge of one has to write in their genre and the other one's gonna write in the other genre, so on and so forth, and then that's how they become lovers. The thing is, I actually think January might be the weakest main character in all these books. January is she's very impulsive, I guess is the best way to explain how January is in this book. There's always a theme with a lot of Emily Henry's books where a lot of people like to drink. Which, does that mean I have an issue with drinking? No, but it feels like the obsession of everyone, every single time I read these books, everyone has to like drink. And January is the worst one out of all of them. I'm like, bro, you need to go to like an AA meeting, because she does drink a lot in this book, and it's just like, bro, you gotta freaking chill. There is some issues with that with January. I just think January is a very impulsive character and she goes 0 to 100 so quickly on a lot of things, and it makes it really hard to get behind her back, because you as a reader can sit back and be like, well, that's kind of a flaw. So I kind of look back at it like that. That means I think the book is awful? No, I gave it a 4 out of 5 when I read it the first time. I haven't read it since, and I don't do rereads too much because of the reason there's a lot of books in the world, and I really just want to keep reading more and more new books. Only way I will do like a reread is like if it's a kid's book that I haven't read since I was a kid for YouTube, or just stuff like that. That's when I do rereads. I really don't do a lot other than that. The next one on here that I did read is People We Meet on Vacation. You follow Alex and Poppy. This is the definition of just long-term friends that always had feelings for each other. This book was fine. I had some issues with it early on, but my favorite part, so in this book, Emily Henry does a flashback. Like, they've been friends for 10 years, and it goes like 10 years ago, 9 years ago, 8 years ago, kind of like that, which is really cool. And the best part about this book, I feel personally, is the flashbacks. The current stuff isn't very good because it's super awkward, because the two of them are just not on the same level, because they do actually like love each other, but it's just really awkward, and it's just not the same because Poppy's trying to make it the same as had always been, but Alex has like kind of moved on, which is a really cool thing to see. The flashback parts of this book is what I really like. You get to see them grow and fall in love with each other through that, and then you sit there and think after you get to the end, you're like, these two deserve to be together, and then they do. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, wow, they finally deserve it. You can see why they love each other. And I did like People We Meet on Vacation. At first when I read it, I didn't know how I felt about it, but the more and more I kept thinking about it, the more and more I'm like, yeah, this is a really good book. So I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. And I really did enjoy this book a lot more than I thought I would, but man, it was a fun read. So the next one on here is Funny Story. The main characters is Daphne and Miles. This one was interesting. It was a lot different than I was anticipating on going in, but I kind of enjoyed it in a way where you think it's a happy ending at the beginning of the book with Daphne, but then you learn, well, it turns really quickly because Daphne was engaged with someone else. The guy named Miles was engaged to someone else, and both of the people who they were engaged to ended up being together because they both fell in love with each other. So then Daphne had to move in with Miles because she had nowhere else to live, and then she had to live in an area where she just was alone. The ability of being alone in your own, like in a town where you're not really friends with people, kind of makes sense because you are truly alone. And this book is cool because you get to, yes, you have the romantic side of things with Miles just showing Daphne how to like just meet people and be friends with people, but Daphne herself is growing as a character throughout this book of learning what independence is. I'm a very big advocate person for independence. When you have Daphne on her own, truly learning who her friends are, who her people are, it's a really fun story. And of course you get the little added bit with romance with Miles, and I think there's parts of these books, out of all the 6 of them, I would say some of them are really, really good, where it's just like a normal day-to-day life, but there is some romance in it, which I think I like more than a book that's focused more on romance compared to a book where there's like no romance and that's about it. Like, I prefer a book how Emily Henry writes it, where there's little romance, but there's a lot of just, you're learning about these characters in their life, and then the romance is just secondary. I kind of like that element in these books, and I think that's where Funny Story really peaks up for me, because I was like, oh, I really like that a lot. So if I had to give this one a rating, I think I'd give it a 5 out of 5. This was a really fun book to read. Now we're getting to probably my favorite book out of this whole little stack, and that is Happy Place. The main characters is Harriet and Wen. This is, again, I realized though, like, why I have this is probably my favorite and Funny Story, is you don't focus on the romance. The romance is there. Harriet and Wen are engaged, but they like separated, but they haven't told their friends that they've been friends with for years, and then they go out to like an Airbnb with all these friends for a wedding. The thing is, their friend group is slowly growing apart, and Harriet notices it. They all know it's happening, so this feels very forced that this is kind of happening. And it's a reality of life that when you have friends you've been friends with for years, you just becoming an adult, you just end up growing apart, and it's not like it's a bad thing. I don't think it's an issue. It's just reality of life. When I was reading this book, it really hit me down, because I had friends that I used to be day ones with. I always thought these are the guys I'm going to grow old with. These are going to be my friends that I'm going to have every single day. They're going to be at my wedding. They're going to be staying up next to me. Now it's been years and we haven't said a word to each other since. It's one of those things, and it's just such a deep reality of, wow, that's life. So you have that element, and then you have the element of course, the romance of Harriet and Wen trying to figure it out, their relationship, and just figure everything out, which is really cool. But man, I think the deeper element of this book is the outside of the friend group, of life just moving on. I think that's the deeper part about that book in general, more than no romance. 5 out of 5. This is her newest book, and I was actually really excited. I even got a signed copy of it, which was sick. But it is Great Big Beautiful Life. You have Alice and Hayden. Now this is a book where I thought I would like, because the tropes of the previous one is where the romance is more secondary and then everything else is the main focus. And this is like an interview style where you're learning about this woman's life. And you learn there's like a plot twist at the end with Hayden, which is really cool. But the problem is with this whole book is the romance. I felt like, and I said this in my review, but I felt like the romance was unnecessarily. You did not have to have the romance in it at all, and I think the book would have been fine, but because she is a romance author, you have to add some romance in it. But truthfully, reading this, I did not think, yeah, this needs a romance, which is so bizarre to think that this book didn't need the romance added to it, because truthfully, I just didn't really see the romance part of it. It was very forced and it was very fast that I was just felt very lukewarm about. And I didn't feel like, wow, Emily, you did a great job with this book for the romance. I didn't feel that at all. And maybe that's just a me thing, but I did not feel that well getting into this book. I felt this book really missed the mark for the romance, and I wasn't the biggest fan of the interview stuff, and I think it's because the romance was added to it. Now if the romance was taken out, or it hinted, or maybe it was just a little more slow burn romance, because it felt like very quick and immediately they were like together, so it just felt off to me. But I feel like if it was more of a slow burn, the impact of this book probably would have been a lot better for me personally. If I had to give a rating for A Great Big Beautiful Life, I'd probably get like a 3.5 out of 5 just wasn't my cup of tea. Last one on here is book lovers. The main characters are Nora and Charlie. Nora goes to a small town with her sister Libby because, well, why not try and meet a cute boy out there? And she meets Charlie, who in the prologue you meet, and he's kind of an a-hole, and Nora does not like him because they just had a really bad, rough first impression. And with that being said, this book kind of does the thing like Great Big Beautiful Life, where the romance feels very, very rushed. Like, they went out one time and they were like starting to make out like at the front door, and they were gonna like start banging, but they were like, oh well, we're co-workers, we can't do it. So there was that part. But the other thing I felt with this book, and I said this in my review, I felt like Nora was just really hard to get behind in this book. Now, does that mean it's an issue for me? No, because you can make the rest of the characters fun. I think her sister was a lot of fun. I think every time her sister was on page, the book became better because Libby was more of a fun character to follow. And that doesn't mean that Nora wasn't, but Nora was really hard to get behind because she was very, I guess the word is, hateful towards a lot of things. She just was a Debbie Downer on a lot of things, and I understand some elements of why she was, but to me I felt like it was just too much. There was elements of it where I'm like, come on man, like why? Like there was a part where Libby bought a house in this small town because early on Nora mentions to the audience, to the reader, that Libby doesn't like where they're living. They have like a house with 3 kids, well, soon to be 3 kids. It's a really small apartment, and there's only one bathroom. And what happens after that is they find a home in this small town where their kids can grow and their kids can just spread their wings in a way. And Nora hates it because it's a way of Libby leaving her. So to me as a reader, I understood why Nora was bad, but the way that Nora reacted was so bad to me that it really took me away from the book. Because to me, I would have been really bummed out. But I feel like you would have been like, you know what, that makes sense. Granted, a couple pages later, Nora understood. So then Nora was like, I get it. But she wasn't going to do it because New York was like her home. I gotta agree with Libby. I would not want to live in the city. I'm not a big fan of living in the city in general. I prefer a home that has a nice big backyard, nice big home, the white picket fence and all that with a golden retriever or whatever it is. I prefer that kind of lifestyle than living in a city, living in an apartment, yada, yada, yada. So I understand. I actually was on Libby's side, and maybe that's why. But I will say also with this is also an enemies to lover kind of romance, and it didn't really feel like enemies to lovers because it was just a really bad first impression. And then after that, Nora hated Charlie after that in a way, so I just felt like it wasn't really enemies to lovers. So one thing I will say that I like the most about Emily Henry's writing is I love the small town vibes. I grew up in a small town, so when she does describe small towns, I actually can really picture in my head the way that she talks about these small little cute bookstores, these coffee places, and these unique names that she comes up with. Each one of them feels like this is a real town in the US of A, baby. It makes me think of like how Stephen King can write small town folks and everything. It kind of gives me that, but like Stephen King does it a lot better in a different element compared to Emily Henry. Like it's comparing pears to oranges, you can't really compare the two of them. And only way I can compare them is the way they write small towns. They both do a really good job. So I like how Emily writes these small towns. The environment of it always does feel very homey, and I really do enjoy those elements. The only thing I kind of bugs me is the romance parts of her books are not consistent, which is fine in some elements. Some of them feel very rushed, and it doesn't feel like it's earned, if that makes sense. Sometimes when I read romance, I realize the more and more I've read romance, the more and more I prefer slow burn romances. And Emily Henry does a pretty good job of that. Some of her books, not all of her books. The ones I disliked are the ones that are more rushed and didn't feel like, hey, this needs to be forced right now. So that's how it felt like with a lot of these books. I would say about half of them are like 3.5 out of 4. Like on Goodreads, they're all 4-star ratings because I can't give a friggin' half star. So they're all 3.5 stars realistically. But the ones I really like are 5 stars because she does a really good job at making sure the romance is there, but it's not forced and it's very organic. And I really like that. And as you guys can tell, the ones I really like the most are the ones that are more personal and the more focus on the individual character, then the romance comes in. I kind of like those elements a lot more. Now, if I had to give a rating for these books, I'm going to go from my least favorite to my favorite. My least favorite is Book Lovers, Great Big Beautiful Life, Book Reads, People We Meet on Vacation, Funny Story, and then Happy Place. I would give that. That's probably my rating on each one of them. And if I had to give like an average rating for the books, I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 5, because the top 3 are 5s, the bottom 3 are 3.5s. So an average, I guess, make it a 4. I don't know. That's just my rating. Yes, I really do enjoy her books. I love her writing. Every time I read her books, I feel very cozy and comfortable, and I just feel like I'm gonna have a real good time, and I might get she might give me some good laughs out of them, which she does sometimes, which is really fun. But in general though, I do like her books. I think they're really fun. I'm worried though that hopefully her books don't grow to be like overhyped and they just declines. Like Great Big Beautiful Life did give me a little bit of just a bad feeling reading it. I just didn't enjoy it as much, and I was really hyped. I read almost all of her books besides Book Lovers up to this book, and I was so excited that after I read it, I was like, oh man. But in general though, I did enjoy all of her books, and if I had to give them a rating for all of them that I read, is a solid 4 total. 4 out of 5. Really good rating stuff. If you guys made it to the end of the video, I do appreciate it. What did you guys think about Emily Henry's books? Which ones are your favorite? Which ones are your least favorites? Do you agree with what I said about each one of them, or do you disagree with what I said about each one of them? I would love to know down below. Last but not least, stay safe, stay humble, and tell someone you love them. I'll see you guys in the next video. Stay weird.